Part 3, we're going to talk about law enforcement and the African American community. When we talk about law enforcement and the African American community, what's driving perception today? It's all based upon history. In order to understand the black experience with law enforcement, we need to understand the history of law enforcement with the black community. History drives perception. Because throughout the history of the United States, law enforcement has been a tool used to suppress the black African American community. So let's talk specifically about this. Courage. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Rosa Parks. I had no idea that history was being made. I was just tired of giving up. Here's something that all of us know, and sociologists have demonstrated this. No child's born a bigot. When you're born, you're not born a bigot. It's a learned trait. It's a learned trait, being a bigot. The process of countering those negatives with positives, then, can begin at an early age. Bigotry is learned. Hate can also be unlearned in this process. Hate is learned, no doubt could be unlearned. Leading experts on child development argue that the problem begins as early as preschool. This concept of bigotry, racial hatred, racial divide, misunderstanding. All of it begins as a result. I know Brian talked to you about it. We're actually working with the Department of Education to create a course for students dealing with bias crimes. That's the target there. Jackie Robinson. I'm not concerned with your liking or disliking me. All I want is your respect as a human being. Everybody wears 42 now in Major League Baseball on a certain day in honor of Jackie Robinson. He was a trailblazer. Now, when we created this course, all the subject matter experts, we came in and we said, I got 2 clips. A cleaned up version in 42, and then the real thing. It was unanimous by the committee, all the people that we talked about that created this, that we should show the unedited version. Why? Because we can't learn from our history. This clip demonstrates what we talked about, no child being born a bigot.
How many times do you think Pee Wee's going to score today?
Well, I don't know, son. I remember when I was a kid, I saw Honus Wagner play. Scored 3 times that day. I just have to wait and see.
Wow, that would be great.
Cincinnati fans expressing their displeasure as the Dodgers take the field.
Jack Robinson at first, Brad Eddie Snaky at second, Buddy Jorgensen at third, and the captain, Pee Reese at short. Fans ask any man and they'll tell you the Gillette Super Speed Razor is our honey. It is the sweetest shaving razor you'll ever use. Look sharp, feel sharp, be sharp.
They can say all they want. We're just here to play ball.
It's just a bunch of crackpots still fighting the Civil War.
Well, hell, we'd have won that son of a gun if the corn stalks would have held out. We just ran out of ammunition.
Better luck next time, Pee Wee.
Ain't gonna be a next time, Jack. All we got's right here. Right now, you know what I mean? Thank you, Jack.
What are you thanking me for?
I got family up there from Louisville. I need them to know. I need them to know who I am. Playing ball, up.
Play ball!
Playing ball. Maybe tomorrow we'll all wear 42. That way they won't tell us apart.
History. Perception cannot be divorced from history of African Americans in the United States. To understand what's currently driving African American perception of law enforcement, we need to look from the cultural lens of history. Origins of American policing, 1700, 1704, 1704 to 1860s. 1700s, slavery was in existence. 1700s, the first police departments were actually the creation of slave patrols. Why? Slaves were property. Slaves were considered property. 1704, Carolina creates the first slave patrol. 1704 to 1860s, slavery and control of blacks were two main features of early law enforcement. Post-Civil War, we have the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery. We have the 14th Amendment, providing equal protection, citizenship. We have the 15th Amendment, providing equal right to vote. For every action, there is a reaction. What is the reaction? The reaction was Jim Crow. Segregation, Jim Crow laws, blacks as second-class citizens. Jim Crow laws from 1877 to the mid-1960s. Jim Crow laws legitimized anti-black racism, segregation. U.S. Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson upheld in 1896 the concept of separate but equal segregation. It was not changed until Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, ending segregation. And in your notes that we have here, we provide a number of sources with regards to history. The long road to civil rights. So here's the gory statistics. There was 4,743 lynchings during this time period. 3,446 were black. 1,297 were white people helping black people. We saw the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. We saw the Scottsboro case in 1931, and in your packets for my trainers you have what the Scottsboro case was. In this case, 9 African American teenagers were accused in Alabama of raping 2 white females on a train in 1931. The landmark set of legal cases from this incident that dealt with racism and the right to a fair trial. The police were perceived as part of an unfair system as a result of the Scottsboro case. We have the rise of Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam in the 1950s. We have the black militant black leadership, the Black Panther Party in 1966. We have the Newark riots in the 1960s and the Newark riots in 1967. In your packets for my trainer, we provide an article detailing the Newark riots. The Newark riots were based upon a misperception. That's what set it. The spark that set the Newark fire, the Newark riots, was a misperception. As it was brought out in the community, it was alleged that a black taxi driver was killed by white officers when actually he was arrested. That was the spark. The tinder, which was lit from that in the Newark riots, was generational, years in the making. Lack of social economic opportunity in Newark itself. And the rise, and specifically the fuel that caused a spark to ignite myriad of socioeconomic issues facing the black community in urban America, included but was not limited to public housing falling apart, obsolete healthcare system, inadequate schools, lack of jobs, crime, racial tension, and allegations of excessive force by police were all the actual underbrush which that spark lit. What were the results of the Newark riots? Overall, 320 riots and civil unrest broke out in 257 cities in the country. In Newark alone, there was 26 people killed, 1,055 businesses either damaged or destroyed, 29 residences were destroyed, monetary loss in 1967 value of around $10 million. And in your package, you have the entire breakdown of the riots and the causes of the riots. We have Martin Luther King, the March to Selma, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as well, the nonviolent movement as well. The long road. Why does history matter? It matters because the black experience with the police department is draped with this history. The past and present contribute to a culture of fear and distrust of the African American community against law enforcement. Why? Because so many images and so many instances, it was the police departments that were used as a tool for segregation. Here's some of those images. Prior to, and throughout the civil rights movement were often whites, and the enforcement arm of legal racism, which led to physical harm, death, oppression in the African American community. Many people today had immediate family members that lived through this period. The black community remembers. And oh, by the way, it's not the 1950s. It's not the 1960s. If we can trace this through the 1970s, we can trace this through the 1980s, to the 1990s, to 2000, to current 2017, this perception. Why does history matter? Well, for example, the examples I previously gave in the other slide was desegregation of the South. This slide here was actually as a result in the 1970s, early 1970s, of desegregation in Boston. There was mandatory busing. The person ready to be stabbed by the American flag was a person, wrong place, wrong time. Black lawyer actually got off the bus and got off a bus into a protest. What was the protest? Parents and students protesting mandatory busing, desegregation of the Boston schools. This picture was taken right before he was stabbed with this American flag. Rodney King. We see throughout this in perception what's driving perception and this mistrust. Here's perception. And to understand this perception allows us to actually have the first steps to have a communication with members of the African American community. Blacks are less trustful of police than are whites because of frequently perceived police injustice, as well as the belief of police tactics being racially biased. 27% of blacks, as opposed to only 14% of whites, reported that their last police encounter was unjustified and that the police had used excessive force against them. Again, perception. Gallup poll, 2003. 85% of black respondents compared to 53% of white respondents reported that racial profiling was widespread. These perceptions, along with an extensive history of degradation at the hands of police, have led many black citizens to question both the legitimacy and trustworthiness of police organization. Legitimacy is a political science term. Legitimacy, the authority to in fact enforce the law. This was put for a reason to in fact spur discussion. So what happens? Black community goes in one corner. Police community goes into another corner. And never the two shall communicate. Are we more or less generally divided in the U.S. now than previous? That was not a rhetorical question. Please someone answer. More, thank you. Again, more. So, I have a Blue Lives Matter in my office. That very flag I have up. Blue Lives Matter. Okay. What is law enforcement's perception of Black Lives Matter? All lives matter. You don't think, okay, all lives matter. Yet, if I am actually, and you're correct, all lives do matter. You've If I say all lives matter to a person who's a member of Black Lives Matter, what's the perception going to be? Black lives don't matter.
You're invalidated.
And we go round and round and round we go. When we stop communicating and understanding, have a basic understanding of this, when in fact we have separate corners, Black Lives Matter, so you know what, we're going to create, gosh darn it, Blue Lives Matter. Because all blue lives matter. So, this course, again, this is an uncomfortable course. If you're feeling uncomfortable right now, then I'm doing my job. And, as a trainer, you got to ask these questions. We actually brought in someone from Black Lives Matter. Let her take a look at the presentation. Asked her, hey, what's your perception of police? What is Black Lives Matter? And in actuality, we asked them, and Angela Dean is the community activist. She actually gave us a write-up as to what the organization is from their perception. Is Black Lives Matter anti-cop? Black Lives Matter organization is not anti-police. Fallacies seems to have been birthed from the death of 5 police officers who were murdered in Dallas. With regards to this, no linkage with regards, according to their perception, to the group. Some of Black Lives Matter, other persons of color, have a strong disdain with regards to the marginalization, abuse, unfair practices that they deal with. The whole point is this. If we start breaking down into different groups, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, we create a whole other group, All Lives Matter, but we're not communicating, what's the chances of us actually having a common ground? Us versus them. Sarah, ties with what you're talking about. Having a conversation. At the very least, understanding what's driving perception. Paramilitary approach is another common theme that we see with regards to it. Biases and unconscious, unintentional beliefs based upon race and ethnicity. What's the data show with regards to perception? Regarding police-involved deadly force situations, 6 out of 10 whites, but only 1/5 of blacks believe race does not affect the police in the use of deadly force, according to a poll after the Michael Brown Ferguson situation. 63% of whites are confident that police treat blacks and whites equally. 40% of Latinos, 21% blacks feel the same way. 60% of whites believe recent killings of unarmed black men, isolated incidents, not a sign of broader problems. 45% Hispanics, only 18% of blacks subscribe to the isolated incident in view. Again, I'm not saying that this is correct. What I am saying is, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is driving the perception of you. That's what I'm saying. This is the reason why I know in this room, active shooter situation, all of you are going to run towards danger. Because that's how you're wired. That's the oath you took, protect and serve. This is the perception of you in the African community and what's driving. What does the data show? Another poll with regards to racial gap and accountability. 70% of blacks think police departments do a poor job of holding officers accountable for misconduct. Only 27% of whites agree. What's the facts? University of Economics, Roland Fryer, PhD, examined over 1,000 shootings in 10 major police departments. Found no racial differences with regards to officer-involved shootings. Facts. Facts. What did Fryer find? He did find that black civilians are more likely to experience other types of force, non-deadly force, including handcuffing without arrest, being OC sprayed or pushed to the ground. We commonly refer to that as physical force by the officer. On the use of non-lethal uses of force, blacks and Hispanics are more than 50% more likely to experience some sort of force interactions with the police. Perception being driven by the media as well. Misconduct. 2014, 2 Florida officers, including a deputy police chief, were fired after FBI informant informed that members of the Ku Klux Klan were effectively attempting to infiltrate the police department. This was the second time in 5 years the agency, the FBI, uncovered officer membership in the Ku Klux Klan. Perception of bias. Although these incidents increase a negative perception of law enforcement, occurrences are relatively rare. There exists a stereotype of black Americans wherein there's a stereotype of black Americans by the police community that they are perceived as violent and criminal. What does the black community see? What does the minority community see? Quote, narrative driven by video images of real misconduct, possible misconduct, and perceived misconduct. FBI Director, former FBI Director, James Combs. Media, does the media play a role in driving this? Yes. It's not about whether the police actions are illegal or not, whether the media slants or not, but about the perception of the black community is. which in turn makes reality. Perception becomes reality. The visual effect of all these negative confrontations result in fear, anger, and distrust of the police. So how do we end this? Again, this is sort of just to have a general understanding. This whole training is the floor. The floor. We build upon the floor by at least understanding perception of us. How do we end this? Part of the course. Police fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they haven't communicated with each other. Not my words, Martin Luther King Jr. And so with regards to what's driving the perception of you from the African American community, these are those perceptions.